Hi, and welcome to PBS News Digital Live. I'm Dima Zain. Last night, we watched President Trump address a joint session of Congress. And to break down everything we saw, we are joined by PBS News Capitol Hill correspondent Lisa Desjardins and PBS News White House correspondent Laura Barron-Lopez. Thank you both for joining us.
Good to be here.
Before we jump in, I want to remind our viewers, Laura and Lisa will be taking your questions live. So if you have any, drop them in the chats, and we'll get to as many as soon as possible. All right, to jump in, for the both of you, last night, obviously, we watched President Trump give his speech to Congress, and he laid out his vision for the rest of his term, but he also reflected on the past 44 days in office, when a lot has happened in those 44 days. So, and you both were on Capitol Hill covering this last night. So, Laura, I want to start with you. The theme of the speech was the renewal of the American dream. I want to ask you, what was Trump's goal in the speech yesterday, and do you think he succeeded at it?
Well, I think Trump's speech, hit on a number of themes. I mean, it was essentially him trying to justify the actions that he's taken so far to the American public. All while a lot of Americans voted for him to raise the cost of goods, or to lower the cost of goods, to address their issues with the economy and what they viewed was an economy that wasn't working for them. And the president didn't exactly address that last night. He talked a lot about his anti-transgender agenda. He talked about his efforts to lead one of the biggest deportation plans, potentially in American history. And he also, talked a lot about his effort and the efforts that he's tasked Elon Musk, currently the wealthiest person in the world, with to completely slash the federal government, cut spending across the board, root out, so-called fraud, although they haven't provided evidence of fraud to date, and to gut the federal workforce. So those were some of the key elements of his speech. He also talked a little bit about foreign policy and him saying that he still wants to find a peace deal with Ukraine, not attacking Ukraine as much as he has in recent days, where he's repeated falsehoods in leading up to the speech, saying that Ukraine was responsible for starting the war. It was Russia who invaded Ukraine. So, overall, when you look at speeches like this, especially this early on in an administration, they're not necessarily that consequential. I mean, he is trying to justify the actions that he's taken to date, which are receiving some backlash. But really what we should be paying attention to is what he ultimately does, not what he says.
Yeah, and I want to come back to DOJ and Ukraine and what he mentioned in his speech. But before we do, Lisa, you were in the chamber. Right. And obviously, we know some lawmakers were absent, and then we also heard that some, AOC said she was not going to attend. We had some other Democratic lawmakers who said they're going to silently protest. Yeah. But there was one protest that stood out, and we have a video, so if we can get that on the screen.
Mr. Green, take your seat. Take your seat, sir. Take your seat. Finding that members continue to engage in willful and concerted disruption of proper decorum, the chair now directs the Sergeant-at-Arms to restore order. Remove this gentleman from the chamber.
Now, Lisa, you were in the chamber. We can't really hear exactly what he's saying. I don't know if you know, but can you tell us a little bit about that moment?
Well, he told reporters afterwards that what he was saying is that the president does not have a mandate. President Trump kept saying, I have a mandate. He does not have a mandate. Specifically, Al Green was concerned about Medicaid, to enact Medicaid cuts. Now, there's a lot to say, and I think we'll probably do more segments on what's going on with Medicaid and the Republican budget, and why, when you do the math, it would necessitate Medicaid cuts if they continue to keep all their pledges that they've made. So Al Green said he was worried about people in his district who are poor, who depend on Medicaid, and about the cuts that he sees coming. Now, you're right, he wasn't the only one protesting, but it was completely unprecedented. I have never seen anyone interrupt a speech for that long and stay standing for that long. And we've never seen anyone have to be removed from the chamber or ushered out by the sergeant at arms as we did before. You know, when we had Joe Wilson, the Republican who interrupted President Obama and said, "You lie," that was at that moment shocking that happened. It was, no one really knew how to react. It was completely an abandonment of protocol and rude to the sitting president. But that ushered in this era. And now here we have at the other end a Democratic member standing up and protesting so long that he was forced out. Now, most other Democrats did, in fact, protest silently. You saw women wearing pink. That was for solidarity and also to signify women power. But you also saw the signs put out by the Progressive Caucus that had a variety of phrases on them. Some said Musk steals, some said, I think, save veterans, protect Medicaid, and on the back, false. Rashida Tlaib, who a lot of the people watching may know, representative, she had a whiteboard where she was changing the phrases she was writing to keep up with the president's speech. And they were very clever, I got to tell you. If you look at my Twitter feed, I put out a bunch of them. But at one point when she was talking about immigrants, she said, when he was talking about immigrants, she wrote, "What about the immigrants who worked for you?" So there was a real attempt to try and remain dignified against a president who Democrats do not see as dignified, a president who was really lobbying, in some part, really petty jabs at them during this speech. They wanted to remain dignified. Most of them kept with that, but a few of them, Al Green stood up, and a few others wore shorts that said resist, and they also were escorted out of the chamber.
And we have a few viewer questions that are pertaining to this specific issue, so I want to go ahead and read them all, and then if you all want to take turns answering them, or whoever wants to jump in. I think you just kind of answered, this is Mark Taylor Canfield from YouTube's question, which was, when was the last time a member of Congress protested at a presidential speech to Congress?
The last time was, I think, last year with President Biden, when Marjorie Taylor Greene yelled, and she yelled out about Laken Riley, and then a bunch of other Republicans joined in protest. She actually was potentially in some ethical trouble for a minor infraction, like wearing a hat in the chamber when Democrats were in charge and when President Biden was there. But she wore her hat last night. She kept it under her shawl, like sneaking it in. So this is now, unfortunately, a yearly occurrence, and Republicans have certainly done it the most, and then we saw Democrats really feeling the need to do it this time.
And Sharon Hunt 67 on TikTok said, why didn't the rest of the Dems do something?
I mean, there's clearly been a bit of fracturing within the party, especially after the election, and you can kind of see it dividing a little bit amongst generational lines or leadership, who's in leadership and who's not in leadership, which is that the leaders of the Democratic Party, whether they're in the Senate or in the House, had been telling their members yesterday, we don't want to vocally protest, don't do anything that it draws too much attention, don't take an aggressive act of protesting. And there was dissent in the meetings that they had, and there were, more progressive members or younger members who disagreed with that, saying that they thought that this was the moment. I mean, how can the party on one hand say that during the election have said that Donald Trump was a threat to democracy? They're continuing to say it as he basically steamrolls past Congress, which is, I think, another thing we should talk about. But they're arguing over and over again that what he's doing is not normal, and that he's basically disregarding their entire Article I powers of Congress. And so why treat it as normal? And why go in there and just sit there during a speech as though everything is normal? And so you're seeing the party basically disagree on how to respond to him. And there were some members who didn't show up, like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She wasn't there. She was doing, I believe, a live stream at the time, responding to the speech in real time. There were the progressive members, as Lisa noted, who had the sign. Some of them walked out. I think Congressman Maxwell Frost had a shirt that said on the back, "There is no king here." So you're seeing a bit of a fracture amongst Democrats about how exactly to respond to President Trump, how quickly they respond, and they're struggling a bit because they aren't necessarily adapting to this new media ecosystem, which is very much 24/7, especially online. And the older lawmakers and the leadership is not necessarily like aware of how to be online and combat Republicans online in the way that you're seeing President Trump, or the way that you're seeing Vice President Vance tweeting out almost daily, and Elon Musk also is tweeting almost every single hour on his social media platform to his more than 200 million followers. You're not necessarily seeing the equivalent of that on the Democratic side.
And probably a lot of folks watching know this, but they not only enlisted sort of this, like, especially male podcast culture, but they've really enhanced it, and they've kind of created this almost industry around Trump of like younger, often, not always younger, but kind of male podcasters with large male, not entirely male audiences that they have really created into its own universe now that they've deployed, and that Musk has been very good at deploying too.
And speaking on Musk, the president's address kind of felt like this list of his greatest hits so far in these 4 days that he's done. And one of the largest moments of applause that we saw was when he was calling out Elon Musk. And Elon Musk stood up and all of the work that Musk has done on Doge. And we have another video, if we could play it out.
Under the Trump administration, all of these scams, and they're far worse, but I didn't think it was appropriate to talk about them. They're so bad. Many more have been found out and exposed and swiftly terminated by a group of very intelligent, mostly young people, headed up by Elon, and we appreciate it. We found hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud.
So, Laura, the president spoke and he gave a long list of these billions of frauds and the way that they've said that they've discovered it. And you've done a lot of reporting on this specifically. So how do those numbers add up?
Well, they don't really add up. So Doge has this website that has a wall of receipts, and right now they're claiming that they've saved about 100 billion or so, and that was what you heard the president talk about last night. The thing about that is that wall of receipts is riddled with errors, with addition and subtraction errors, with, they have things listed on the wall of receipts, contracts that they've supposedly cut, that sometimes are duplicates. So that would mean that they're counting multiple contracts that they've cut. Some that are on there are not even, they don't represent any savings. And our colleague Kyle Madura talked to one of those contractors who said, I never even had a finalized contract with the government. So them claiming that somehow cutting my contract saved the government millions of dollars, which wasn't even what his contract would have initially been. It would have only been, I believe, a few $100,000. He's like, it was just wrong on multiple fronts. So based on the estimates that we've done based on other outlets and like economists that we've talked to who've crunched the numbers, a generous estimate of how much Doge has supposedly saved. Again, it's kind of in the eye of the beholder whether or not that's savings, because they may be beneficial programs to Democrats, but also they may be programs that Republicans have supported in the past as well. So again, it's whether or not someone actually believes that those are savings. But a generous estimate would be around $4 billion, not 100 billion or more than 100 billion. So the president claiming that it was fraud is just not accurate. They have not provided any evidence that any of these contracts that they cut were fraud. Are they contracts that the president didn't like? Yes. Are they contracts that potentially had a diversity and inclusion initiative or that went to helping with migrants, sheltering migrants? Yes. That doesn't make them fraud. So if any incoming president decides that they don't like where certain congressionally approved money is going, they can, change it to fit their agenda. And that's what most presidents do. They don't call it fraud just because the prior administration was spending it a certain way. The other thing here is to cancel these contracts is potentially in violation of the Impoundment Control Act, which is a law that essentially says that if money is approved and passed by Congress and it is allocated for this specific purpose, then the president doesn't really have the authority to withhold it, to delay it, or to take it all the way back and decide to spend it on something else. And you're seeing federal judges raise that question already as things play out in the courts, which is, oh, this looks like it could be a violation of the Impoundment Control Act. Now, President Trump and his OMB director, Russell Vought, have said that they think that that law, it is a law, but they think that that law is unconstitutional, so they're intentionally testing it. They're trying to see if they can potentially reverse, take this all the way to the Supreme Court and see if they can reverse that Impoundment Control Act. But that doesn't mean that just because they believe it's unconstitutional that it currently is. So, that was one of a number of those. We're going through the line items that the president seemed to claim, but a number of them were pretty clearly outright false. One of the other big lies that the president repeated was that there are millions of dead people that are receiving Social Security payments. That's not accurate. There are errors within the Social Security Administration. It's about 1% of the payments the Social Security Administration pays out are improper payments, but those are actually for living people, overpayments to living people.
And we're getting some questions in, and one is on those. So thank you all for sending in your questions. Please continue to. We'll try and, again, get to as many as soon as possible. So Elaine Grimes Buffel, and I'm so sorry, I hope I'm getting these names correct, via Facebook is asking, are the salaries of fired federal workers on this list of cuts listed by DOJ?
No, they don't appear to be. I haven't seen.
They're not. It's just contracts.
It's just contracts.
Yeah.
So it's just contracts. And then we have Paul Kolasar from Facebook. Thank you for writing in. Why is Congress so willing to give up the purse strings?
Because it's run by Republicans and they have a Republican president. And it's not just any Republican president, it's Donald Trump. And he has spent now almost a decade politically punishing anyone who criticizes him in a very public way, and also amassing a really strong base that supports him in a way they don't actually really support other Republicans unless those Republicans are also supporting Trump. It really is. At one point, I think Trump was talking about even changing the name of the party to the Trump Party, and it is in a way the Trump Party. So I think that's one part of it, and I think that's the biggest part. But the other part of it is Republicans on Capitol Hill have spent, those who've been there a while, have spent the last 4 years wanting to do more because they have felt like they just have been, they've had their own chaotic problems where most rank and file members really haven't had any say in what's been going on. They've been frustrated. And they all have concerns about the debt and deficit, even though they added to it quite a lot. Now that they're in power, they want tax cuts, they want to be legislating, they want to be doing these things that they've talked about a long time. The way they're doing it, however, the puzzle pieces don't fit. They haven't quite figured that out yet. They've got a problem. But the only way to get these things done is through Trump. And Trump has made it clear that he really, and as Volodymyr Zelensky learned, anyone who raises even an eyebrow against him is immediately penalized. So what's happened here are a couple dynamics. House Republicans do have an agenda, especially on tax cuts, that they want to push forward. And to do that, they are willing to kind of go along with whatever else Trump wants, how he wants that. But also, I think this is just the power of Trump over his party.
You mentioned Zelensky and Ukraine, and I want to talk a little bit about Trump's message on Ukraine. Obviously, on Monday, we all saw, Trump pause military aid to Ukraine, and after a hostile meeting in the Oval Office with Zelensky. So I want to ask both of you, how do you think Trump's message on Ukraine was last night?
I was really surprised. I thought he was going to go much harder on Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I said at the start, like what he says in this speech is not necessarily as important as what he actually ends up doing. And so, the administration says that they're still trying to work towards this mineral deal and work towards a peace agreement. But the president has made very clear that he is much more willing to be antagonistic and attack an American ally in Ukraine versus an adversary of the U.S. and a country and a leader there in Vladimir Putin that so many Republicans, including some of Trump's closest allies, have called a dictator. And so we'll see if the president continues the tone that he used last night. I doubt that he will, because over and over again he has gone so far as to call the Ukrainian president a dictator, which is just false. And he has continued to take a very aggressive stance towards Ukraine, all as Europe and European leaders are essentially saying this is a massive realignment and a massive shift. And Europe is starting to picture a world where there is no longer a transatlantic alliance, and where they have to move forward and protect democracies and Western democracies on their own. I mean, this is also happening at a time, Dima, when the president is deciding to almost pick a battle with every single ally that the U.S. has, whether that's with Mexico, whether it's with Canada, about tariffs, and whether it's with our European allies.
And since you brought up tariffs, I want to go a little bit to tariffs. So obviously, the speech fell on the same day that the 25% on Mexico and Canada was implemented. So went into effect. And then last night he announced his new plans to kind of do this this tariff, what is it called, matching, per se. And I think we have a video as well that we can play of that moment.
April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs kick in. And whatever they tariff us, other countries, we will tariff them. That's reciprocal, back and forth. Whatever they tax us, we will tax them. If they do non-monetary tariffs to keep us out of their market, then we will do non-monetary barriers to keep them out of our market. There's a lot of that, too. They don't even allow us.
So I have a question for both of you. So Lisa, I'll start with you. Where do most Republicans stand on Trump's tariffs?
I'll tell you from what I saw last night, they all stood, all of them. I was watching Republicans. They all stood when Trump talked about tariffs, which was amazing to me, especially with senators who have been there a long time, who I personally have spoken to, who I know have deep misgivings about tariffs. So they are publicly supporting whatever Trump does and starting a little bit behind the scenes to say, well, let's just see what happens. Hopefully it won't be that bad. But privately, they have real concerns. These are members who have farmers in their district who remember that they lost a lot of money when the tariffs went into place, when Trump 1.0. And in fact, the federal government had to, I think, bring in, was it like $30 billion, $38 billion in payments to make up for the losses for farmers. So there is a lot of nervousness about that across industries, across regions, but publicly they're supporting him for now. I think the other thing about tariffs is that we know a lot about how these work. It's not like a new idea. This is a 19th century idea. This was really hot after the War of 1812. That's when tariffs were big. And the United States spent a lot of time putting out a lot of tariffs in the 19th century. And by the time we made it all the way through World War I and to World War II, the country realized, no, it's a global world, and these tariffs actually are hurting us and our consumers, and abandoned it. It was an older world policy that Trump is now trying to bring back, and he's doing it almost like sort of with his eyes closed, these broad tariffs to broad sectors. There was a woman at the Capitol yesterday, one of the guests of a member from Vermont, who runs a maple syrup business, and she is worried she's going to be crushed because she needs to be able to trade with Canada. So while the president is trying to negotiate a better deal for America writ large, he says, the fact is that businesses are very nervous. I haven't heard of any businesses that are really cheering this on, even as, to your question, Republicans were on their feet.
And that kind of brings me to my question for Laura, which is, what's the potential global impact of this?
Well, it would have a massive global impact, and there'd be a lot of disruption. I mean, U.S. allies would be harmed. Obviously, this would hurt Canada and Mexico. It would also hurt us, though, to Lisa's point, which is that, tariffs are a tax on U.S. importers. So essentially, the things that could go up in terms of cost for consumers, just to name a few: vegetables, fruit, gas. There's a lot of things. Cars, yeah. And also, you name it. Lisa mentioned maple syrup. farmer in Vermont, but there's also farmers in Virginia, just next door to us, who or where we are right now, actually, and that rely on like 80 to 90% of some goods coming in from Canada in order to, fertilize. And so this is something that the longer the tariffs last, even if the president decides to lower the percentage, the longer that they last, the more pain American businesses and consumers are going to feel. Okay. And so you could see, we're already starting to see some backlash to DOGE and to those cuts. And even those cuts to programs are impacting American businesses and American workers across the country. And then on top of it, you add tariffs. Republicans may be facing not just businesses in their communities that could be impacted, but just general constituents who say that they voted for the president because they wanted to have a better economy.
It could be easily a form of inflation, And so, but I think that when you're talking about sort of tariffs going forward, it does come back to this question of like Congress just not really exerting any control over what the president is doing or even trying to.
And that brings me to two questions, and these are both from questions that from viewers that I think are great. John on YouTube is saying, is there a chance that Trump could reverse the tariffs quickly?
Yeah.
That's how he does it. Yeah, that's how he. Yeah. He's it's more, I guess, tactical than strategic, but he's just trying to exert some kind of small gain with these giant, potentially really damaging tactics. Mm-hmm. So and he'll go back and forth.
Yeah, and Granny Goose, and this kind of goes into what you were talking about Congress and control. Granny Goose on YouTube is at, cool name. Love it. It seems that Congress itself never gets a chance for a question and answer session with a sitting president. Why is that?
But they do. But they occasionally do, and it's all behind closed doors, unfortunately. And in fact, Trump today is going to be meeting with the House Freedom Caucus, used to be the most conservative group. It's a group that actually has withered in size. It's much smaller than it used to be, but these are the folks he really needs to get on board any bill that's going to keep government funded as we approach deadline next week, and also any kind of giant, big, beautiful Trump agenda bill, because they have major issues with spending. So that he really needs them to not get in the way of his agenda, because they want some things to move farther right, which is what it's going to be a delicate dance. So he's meeting with them today, and they'll get to ask him whatever they want, but we will only know if sources tell us afterward what they said.
And Drew Ward on TikTok has a good question, which is there anything Trump could do to lose support of his core base?
I think that what we're talking about, which is if the price of goods continues to go up, if inflation goes up, if American businesses are hurt. You're already starting to hear stories and talk to federal workers that were cut. I talked to one just last week, a veteran who had voted for Trump, who was fired from his job and is now incredibly upset. This is not, they say this is not what they voted for. Did they think that certain government spending should be reined in? Yes. Did they think that Trump was going to make the economy better and help them? Yes, they thought that. They did not expect what is necessarily happening right now. And so you're seeing the potential where if constituents and if people across the country continue to feel more pain than they are feeling some relief, then that is where he could lose some of his base.
I think he'll lose some people, but I think that base is very, very strong. It's very strong, and I think it's so strong that I think, in a lot of worst case scenarios, like I could see generations ahead, people are going to try and claim to be Trump people. Now is that going to be a minority of people? It might be a majority. I don't know. But I think that it's a strong, ardent base that doesn't necessarily. They are all in on this man, whatever he says and does. A lot of them.
And when you dive a little deeper into like why they may be all in or why they believe the president, one of President Trump's big tactics is to lie about something or to create a falsehood or to create his own alternate reality and then repeat it over and over and over again. And people who worked for him during the first administration talk about this a lot, including one of his former communications officials, Stephanie Grisham. They have talked about how the president told staff during the first administration, repeat this lie. If you repeat it over and over and over again, eventually the public will believe it. And that is also how he's able to keep a grip on his base, especially when Republicans in Congress, as Lisa has laid out, do not confront him, do not challenge him. One prime example of this that is playing out right now in front of us is with an agency that Lisa and I have both covered extensively, with the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. Senator Marco Rubio, when he was a senator, was a big supporter of the work of foreign aid that was carried out through that agency. You could probably go back and find a bunch of floor speeches of him talking about it, how he supported it, how he thought that the work that they did was great. And now, as the Secretary of State, he is watching or overseeing and playing part to the entire dismantling of that agency. And it is happening also as Elon Musk is lying about this agency being a criminal agency, and saying that it was engaged in massive amounts of fraud without, again, providing any evidence of that fraud. So that's just one very specific example of where a Republican who for a long time approached foreign aid a certain way is now not really confronting or standing up to the president on it.
The other thing I know you're talking about really quickly that I think a theme of last night's speech too that is important is, and he's talked about this, is parts of the speech were like a campaign speech, but he talked about, and this is a man who survived 2 assassination attempts last year. That's remarkable, historic. But he said, I think that this happened so that I could save America. So he's sort of presenting himself as a savior, and there obviously were many people on the right that were hungry for that, hungry for some kind of person to say, I know what we should do, and only I know what we should do, and that's his message. So it's kind of like I'm not a normal politician, I'm something more. He also puts layers between himself and anything that could go wrong. So when talking to fired federal workers who voted for Trump, a couple I've talked to this week, they're putting the blame a little bit more on Elon Musk than on President Trump, and so that's the kind of thing that Trump likes. He wants somebody else to be there. Or even we heard last night about egg prices. He set up his own ag secretary to take the fall for egg prices. So it's so then that makes it easy for the base to stick with him because he's saying, oh, it's not me, it's all these other people, but they work for him.
Lisa and Laura, so much to dive into. I wish you all could stay with me all day and stay with our viewers. But thank you all for coming and sitting with me today. And hopefully we can have you back. I know it's going to be a long time coming. So welcome back anytime. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in. Have a great weekend.